On the morning of March 24th, 1972, 35-year-old Joseph Larkin was driving a Nyack High School school bus loaded past capacity downhill on Gilcrest Road. The bus was filled with 48 passengers, 31 males and 17 females, with some passengers having to stand due to the lack of room. The bus in question was a 1967 Chevy Carpenter mounted on a 1968 GMC chassis. At the same time, Penn Central Manifest train WV1 was on the former New York Central River Line going from Weehawken, New Jersey to Selkirk, New York Yard. The train was traveling at around 25 miles an hour and had 83 loaded cars, with 73 coming from the origin at Weehawken, plus 10 more picked up en route at North Bergen. The train was led by Penn Central U25B 2653 and two other locomotives. Both the school bus and the freight train were heading toward the Gilchrist Railroad crossing located in Congers, New York. The crossing was a private one, sporting only a crossbuck and nothing else. These kind of crossings, though, were considered dangerous, as you'd never know a train was coming unless you see the train or hear its horn. At around 7:55 a.m., the engineer began blowing his horn as he approached the crossing. Joseph Larkin, however, didn't slow down. He instead accelerated toward the crossing, hoping to beat the train across. The engineer noticed this and threw on the emergency brakes, but it was already too late. The locomotive smashed into the middle of the bus, splitting it in two like knife through butter. The front half came to rest a quarter mile down the tracks, while the rear section of the bus was torn loose and fell off next to the tracks upside down, with a number of the students still inside, while several others were ejected from the remaining portion of the bus, passing through separated floor sections and falling in between the rails into the path of the train, being killed instantly. 3 students, 17-year-old Jimmy McGinnis, 18-year-old Richard Michaelo, and 14-year-old Bobby Mintier were killed instantly. 45 more students and Larkin himself were severely injured and rushed to a nearby hospital, where 14-year-old Thomas Gross died from his injuries several days later, and 16-year-old Stephen Ward died on April 14th. Some of the children that survived required artificial limbs due to their injuries. Public was outraged. Larkin was brought to trial and charged with criminally negligent homicide in the death of the 5 students on February 16, 1973. At the time of the accident, Larkin was a fireman and a part-time bus driver who had been driving on the route for less than a week. The surviving children admitted to the fact that they didn't really like Larkin, claiming he was rather inexperienced, kept telling the kids to sit down and shut up, and he also frequently drove aggressively, trying to beat other cars to an intersection usually. Larkin claimed they had come to a complete stop and looked both ways before the collision. 16 witnesses and factual evidence, though, proved that wasn't true. After a 5-week trial ending on March 8, 1973, Larkin was convicted on all 5 charges and sentenced to 5 years probation. At his sentencing, he told the judge,
"I have been punished for a year because of what happened, and I think I will be punished for the rest of my life."
The judge would later remark, saying,
"You will be punished for the rest of your life, and you deserve to be."
However, the public was also angry about the safety of the crossing. The crossing had no warning lights, bells, or gates, just a crossbuck, which gives little to no warning of an oncoming train. The rail line was also covered well by the trees, making it very hard to see the train. and considering most Penn Central engines at the time had Brunswick green paint that was rather dark, almost black, that practically camouflaged the engines. So after the accident, Gilchrist Road Crossing was upgraded and now features gates, E-bells, and warning lights that are triggered by the train some distance away to give a more clear warning of oncoming trains. The former Penn Central River Line is now owned by the CSX River subdivision. In 1974, the New York State DMV established Article 19A, which is a system that requires all bus drivers to be qualified to drive by completing a certain amount of requirements, which include biannual medicals with follow-ups if needed, biannual written or oral tests, biannual road tests, yearly defensive driving tests, yearly license abstracts, and fingerprints with criminal history reviews. It also resulted into the federal law that all buses must stop at railroad crossings and drivers must open the doors and look both directions before continuing across the crossing. New York was the first state to adopt the law. The accident also exposed the dangers of school buses with standee areas, and now those kind of buses are a thing of the past. The accident also spawned the idea of installing seat belts into larger school buses, as at the time, only short buses had them. To this day, very little has been done to push the idea, and larger school buses with seat belts are relatively rare, compared to short buses where practically all of them have seat belts. Larkin later died on October 20th, 1998, aged 61, and is buried at the Gate of Heaven Cemetery. 47 years had passed since the accident. Despite being one of the darkest crossing accidents in history, it was thanks to the lessons learned here that helped change the history of railroads and bus travel forever.